The 1970s were a golden era for Hollywood, but not everything was as glamorous as it seemed. Stay tuned as we uncover the tragic, forgotten stories of stars whose lives took a dark and devastating turn. Number 7. David Carradine. David Carradine might not be a name that jumps out at you when you think of 1970s Hollywood, but for 3 years, he was one of the most watched people on television. As the star of the hit series Kung Fu, Carradine captivated audiences worldwide, playing a half-Chinese, half-white Shaolin monk wandering through the American Old West. The role was groundbreaking then, but his portrayal has sparked controversy in the modern age. However, Carradine's life off-screen was even more dramatic. Filled with instability, arrests, substance abuse, and a tragic, mysterious death in a Bangkok hotel room that still raises questions today. While David Carradine's film career in the 1970s is mostly unremarkable, with tiny roles in movies like Mean Streets and leading roles in pulpy fare like Cannonball and Bound for Glory, his TV career is something else entirely. From 1972 to 1975, David Carradine was one of the most watched people on earth as the star of the TV smash hit Kung Fu. While Carradine's portrayal of a half-Chinese, half-white Shaolin monk is ungainly to modern eyes, the ratings of Kung Fu are indisputable, with as many people tuning in to watch Kwai Chang Cain's adventure as people tuned into Game of Thrones decades later. Carradine never quite shook off Kung Fu, nor did his career amount to more, but when audiences in the 1970s weren't at the movies, they were home watching TV. And when they were watching TV, chances are they were watching Kung Fu. The child of a frequently married actor, Jack, as Carradine was known in his youth, had an unstable childhood. The instability would continue throughout his life, as he himself was married several times. He was also frequently arrested and prosecuted for a variety of offenses, which often involved substance abuse. He was an alcohol abuser for many years, until he entered rehab. On June the 4th, Carradine was found dead in his room in Bangkok, Thailand. Carradine was found naked and had hanged himself in the room's closet with a curtain cord. Police said he had been dead for at least 12 hours and found no signs of a struggle. Thai police suggested the death might have been from accidental suffocation due to the autoerotic asphyxiation. Since there was no suicide note, and he was found with a rope tied to both his neck and his genitals. Number 6. James Caan. James Caan was a Hollywood heavyweight, known for his role as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather. But behind the camera, his life was far from the glitz and glam of Hollywood. Caan's career took unexpected twists and turns, and his personal life was marked by loss, addiction, and near bankruptcy. Yet he fought back with resilience and a determination to make his final years count, despite feeling typecast in roles he loathed. His story is one of grit and regret, a roller coaster that reveals the high price of Hollywood fame. James Caan was already an established actor by 1970, but in 1971 he enriched his career with the made-for-TV movie Brian's Song, which earned him an Emmy nomination. A year later, he was cast as short-tempered Sonny Corleone in Francis Ford Coppola's gangster epic The Godfather. While Caan was first cast as Michael Corleone, Caan himself believed Al Pacino was better for the part, and he better for Sonny. Caan was nominated for an Oscar for his performance. Other 1970s movies with Caan include T.R. Baskin, Slither, Gone with the West, Funny Lady, Rollerball, A Bridge Too Far, 1941, and of course, The Godfather Part 2, albeit in a cameo capacity. He died in 2022. Sonny Corleone ended up defining James Caan, but it didn't help that, not unlike his character, he was a little wild. He's done drugs, been married various times, and famously established a residence at the Playboy Mansion. Since he was a kid, he actively engaged in what he called non-Jewish activities, which included boxing, bull riding, and getting himself into trouble. Because of his public image and aided by his real-life persona, studios were keen to pigeonhole him into the traditional masculine role, per The Independent. The example, he played a metastasized version of Sonny in Michael Mann's 1981 Thief, and he went on to play similar masculine roles in The Gambler and The Killer Elite. In an interview with The Independent, Caan bemoaned the lack of choices he was given. He was either Mr. Tough Guy or Mr. Hero. Although that might seem like a great problem to have, Caan thirsted for something more challenging. If there was a role that would have won James Caan an Oscar, it was Sonny Corleone in The Godfather. That was his sole Academy Award nomination, per IMDb. Alas, the award went to the guy in Cabaret, and Caan was left without an Oscar for the rest of his career, which became a source of regret in his later years. In an interview with The Independent, Caan admitted to really wanting an Oscar at 80 years old and being bitter about it. He comforted himself by knowing that anyone who played a cancer victim was an automatic winner. Caan believed that his real-life persona and public image became a distraction for Academy voters. Not finding the roles he wanted, James Caan decided to take matters into his own hands. He wrote and directed the 1980 film drama Hide in Plain Sight. Film critic Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars and said it lacked quality screenwriting and direction. It had a limited release and only grossed $3.8 million at the box office, per IMDb. But Caan believed in its potential and blamed the studio for its lack of impact. In 1981, James Caan's younger sister, Barbara, died from leukemia. He was devastated, especially since he considered her to be one of his best friends. In an interview with The Independent, James said she was the only person he knew that he was afraid of. She had a passionate demeanor with every project she undertook, and James adopted that approach to life after she died. But he also adopted some self-destructive habits, including cocaine usage. James described his drug abuse as a death sentence. To make matters worse, James lost his savings due to bad dealings with his accountant, leaving him penniless. Disillusioned, he took a break from acting while trying to piece his life together. During that 6-year period, James coached his son's baseball team, and it was then that he experienced a rude awakening that forced him to quit drugs. His son threatened a drug dealer with a baseball bat and nearly tried to kill him. With the help from a friend's intervention, he entered recovery. His final stint in rehab came in 1996, the same year he married his 4th wife, Linda Stokes, per Cigar Aficionado. James Caan's attempts to re-enter the industry were a struggle. His first film after his hiatus was Francis Ford Coppola's Gardens of Stone. Caan considered it his official comeback, in which he acted with hunger and thirst, per The Independent. But according to his interview with The Guardian, Coppola had to go out of his way to get Caan casted in the film. Studios were hesitant to give Caan a second chance, distracted by his reputation and the potential insurance costs. It was then that Caan realized that absence didn't make the heart grow fonder. It just made them assume he was dead. At 81 years old, James Caan still had hopes to make a great movie. In a 2021 interview with The Independent, Caan compared himself to Henry Fonda, who hoped to make a great movie before he died. It was unclear whether Caan was able to achieve his goal in the year since. He passed away on July 6, 2022, via Twitter. Number 5. Anita Penberg. Anita Penberg, model, actress, and Rolling Stones muse, lived a life that few could imagine. She was more than just a beautiful face. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who influenced one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Yet beneath her rock and roll goddess persona was a turbulent life filled with addiction, heartbreak, and a tragic ending. Penberg's story is a mix of glamour and sorrow, a cautionary tale of what happens when you dance too close to the fire. Rolling Stones muse Anita Penberg, a romantic partner to both Brian Jones and Keith Richards, was also active in Andy Warhol's factory and an actor in movies. Despite multiple requests to write a memoir, she refused to speak about anything salacious in her life. Far from being a mere muse, Penberg was a force to be reckoned with, called everything from a rock and roll goddess to a voodoo priestess. A renowned wit and intellectual whose madcap antics left even famed partier Keith Richards struggling to keep up. She was known for intimidating the band intellectually and for criticizing musical direction and actually having her feedback taken up. Famously, tracks on Beggar's Banquet were remixed at her suggestion. As her son Marion notes in the film, she had bigger balls than all of them. So, who exactly was Anita Penberg? Well, the Italian-German model was born in 1942 and raised in war-torn Germany. She went to boarding school, where she became fluent in 4 languages, but was expelled at 16 years old. She subsequently spent time in Rome and in New York, where she acted and also became a brief fixture of Andy Warhol's infamous factory scene. But it was a chance meeting with the Rolling Stones while on a modeling assignment in Munich that would forever change the course of her life. Penberg, probably best known for her years with Jones and Richards, is an often misunderstood figure. After finally leaving Jones's side after some tumultuous years of mental and physical abuse, Penberg falls into the arms of a waiting Richards, with whom she'd have 3 children. She's credited with pushing Brian Jones into some of the more experimental directions the Stones explored in the mid-1960s, and she's tied to Richards in his darkest years of addiction until things got too heavy for him, and he had to put some distance between himself and her destructive ways. Penberg's struggles with drug and alcohol abuse were well known, and though she would relapse into alcoholism over the years, she was 17 years sober from drugs at the time of her death. Penberg died on June 13, 2017, age 75 years old, due to complications from hepatitis C. Number 4, Peter Sellers. The comedic genius behind Inspector Clouseau, Peter Sellers, brought laughter to millions, but his private life was no laughing matter. Sellers' off-screen reality was a stark contrast to his zany on-screen antics, marked by intense mood swings, failed marriages, and a battle with addiction that would ultimately cost him his life. His untimely death left many wondering what drove the man behind the mask of comedy to such darkness. What demons haunted Peter Sellers behind the curtains of fame? A revered English comedic actor, Peter Sellers is best known for his role as Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther film series, which released several sequels in the 1970s, The Return of the Pink Panther in 1975, The Pink Panther Strikes Again in 1976, and Revenge of the Pink Panther in 1978. While known for starring in humorous films, Sellers had versatility as a dramatic actor too, with movies like Hoffman, The Blockhouse, The Optimists of Nine Elms, and Being There under his belt. Sellers died in 1980 of a heart attack at age 54. Peter Sellers is widely admired as a British comedic genius, the creator of some of the most memorable characters of 20th century film and broadcasting. He was central to the cult 1960s BBC program The Goon Show, once described as probably the most influential comedy show of all time, while his later role as Chief Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther films brought him international stardom. But in private, he was a difficult, domineering, and jealous man who married 4 times, and once said of himself, "If I can't really find a way to live with myself, I can't expect anyone else to live with me." Now we have fresh testimony from one who tried, and failed. The mental health issues underlying Sellers' behavioral extremes may trace to his childhood trauma. Raised in a family of entertainers who constantly toured, stability and constancy perpetually eluded the young Sellers. The revolving door of caretakers disrupted attachment relationships. Neuropsychologists today cite childhood erratic rearing and disruptive attachments as pivotal in eventual diagnoses like borderline personality disorder. In adulthood, this took the form of dramatic mood swings, intense but unstable friendships, and a variable but unstable sense of identity fueled by his seamless ability to shift characters. On set, Sellers could be unpredictably withdrawn to the point of unresponsiveness one day, animated and gregarious the next. Yet all with an undercurrent of melancholic self-loathing, his silliest slapstick hardly disguised. Big drinking and fast-moving Hollywood actors weren't exactly a rare species in the 1960s and 1970s, but the effects of such a lifestyle for Sellers and those around him were especially disastrous. Firstly, alcohol and drugs affected his health dramatically, with Sellers having his first heart attack before the age of 40 years old, according to Roger Ebert. But to make matters worse, Sellers wasn't given adequate treatment for a variety of reasons. As noted by The Guardian, Sellers' value to the production companies that made his movies meant that his heart issues were continually brushed off. On top of that, Sellers himself was highly superstitious, as reported by The Scotsman, and pursued a number of alternative methods when decisive medical intervention by pulmonary specialists might have had a tangible effect on his health. Coupled with the fact that Sellers did not change his lifestyle, which was amplified by the similar habits of his fourth wife, Lynn Frederick, it became a certainty that his health would continue to decline. In 1980, 16 years after his first heart attack, Sellers' heart finally gave out. The scene, once again, was a glamorous hotel. According to Roger Ebert, Sellers was staying at the Dorchester Hotel in London at the time of the attack. He was taken to London's Middlesex Hospital, where his condition worsened dramatically, and he passed away at 6:28 p.m. on July the 24th, 1980. By his side was his second wife, Britt Eklund, pictured above left, and their daughter Victoria, as well as his fourth wife, Lynn Frederick, to whom he had been married for only a few years. A number of tragic details have emerged surrounding Sellers' death, apart from the relative early age at which he passed away. Firstly, Sellers had been taking steps to reconcile with his children, according to The Scotsman, and is indicated by the presence of one of his daughters at his death. Similarly, on the day of his heart attack, Sellers was due to attend a reunion dinner, according to Ozzy, with his old friends and co-stars on The Goon Show, Spike Milligan, pictured above right, and Harry Seacombe. As reported by Wales Online, Sellers saved his last joke for after his death. He had requested for his funeral the song In the Mood by Glenn Miller, a song all the goons mutually detested, knowing they'd have to sit through it and hopefully share a last laugh. One of the most contentious events of Peter Sellers' life occurred, in fact, after his death, and so did one of its most tragic side stories. At the reading of Sellers' will, it was found that the vast majority of the actor's wealth, said by Ozzy to be around $7 million, was to go straight to his fourth wife, Lynn Frederick, pictured above, to whom he was married at the time of his death. So far, so uncontroversial. However, the will also stipulated that each of Sellers' 3 children were to receive just $1,000 each. At the time, it seemed like a final rebuke from the erratic and emotionally troubled star, although evidence exists, in the form of a recently unearthed letter, that Sellers was attempting to change the beneficiaries of his will at the time of his death, as reported by the BBC. Frederick declined to provide Sellers' 3 children with any more of his fortune than was allocated to them in his will, despite the pleas of Sellers' friend, Spike Milligan, says Sikov. His book also details how, struggling with addiction, she died on April the 27th, 1994, aged just 39 years old. Number 3, Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was the ultimate martial arts icon, a star whose charisma and skill captivated millions worldwide. But just as he reached the pinnacle of his fame, tragedy struck. The sudden and mysterious death of Bruce Lee at the age of 32 years old shocked the world, with many speculating about the real cause. Was it an allergic reaction, or was there something more sinister at play? The revelations from newly discovered letters add yet another twist to the legend's story, a story of ambition, substance abuse, and the pressures of being a cultural pioneer. Arguably the defining image of the 1970s cool, Chinese-American sensation Bruce Lee broke racial barriers in an all-too-brief career that ended with his death in 1973. While he was a child actor in a number of Chinese films, Lee didn't seriously act until he lived in the United States, where he co-starred in the TV series The Green Hornet. Back in Hong Kong, he starred in several kung fu blockbusters like The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and The Way of the Dragon. His stardom overseas grew so irresistible that Warner Brothers created a theatrical vehicle just for him, Enter the Dragon, billed as the first Hollywood-made martial arts film. In 1973, actor and martial arts expert Bruce Lee experienced a minor headache. After taking Equagesic, a prescription painkiller, Lee slipped into a coma and never awoke. It was determined that the cause of the 32-year-old actor's death was a reaction to the ingredient in the pain medication he took. Lee's brain had swollen from 1,400 to 1,575 grams, a 12.5% increase. Recently, a collection of letters written by Lee was found at a flea market. These letters, which have been authenticated by experts, revealed that friend and fellow actor Robert Baker supplied drugs to Lee in secret for several years. This discovery adds Bruce Lee to a long list of celebrities who have struggled with substance abuse. In one letter, Lee wrote to Baker, "I was throwing stones like hell, but am working on the next character. Some coke will help." This statement indicates that Lee had become dependent on the use of certain substances to deal with his work. Cocaine, acid, hash or grass, and mushrooms were mentioned in Lee's letters. Number 2, Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher will forever be known as Princess Leia, but her real-life struggles were far more complex than any galactic battle. Born into Hollywood royalty, Fisher's life was a public roller coaster of mental health battles, addiction, and heartbreak. She was brave, brutally honest, and unapologetically open about her struggles with bipolar disorder and substance abuse. Yet, even after years of sobriety, Fisher's tragic death at age 60 revealed a secret that shocked her fans and admirers. Traces of multiple drugs were found in her system. What was the real cause of Carrie Fisher's death? When Carrie Fisher was chosen to play Princess Leia in George Lucas's Star Wars film, she was virtually unknown. But Fisher doesn't come from nowhere. The daughter of entertainment royalty Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, Fisher started acting while in high school, which she dropped out of to pursue the arts full-time. She started acting in movies with the 1975 film Shampoo, and in 1977 went to a galaxy far, far away by starring in one of the biggest movies of all time, Star Wars. Fisher's career continued into the 1980s. In addition to acting, she became celebrated as a writer, with several published memoirs exploring her life living with bipolar disorder and addictions. Carrie Fisher was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when she was just 24 years old, but it took her another 5 years to accept the diagnosis. She explained that her bipolar usually manifested itself in mania, although depression became more common as she got older, especially agitated depression, which she described as, quote, "I was going much faster than everything else around me. You feel out of step with the world," end quote. Fisher's characteristic unflinching honesty and humor about her bipolar disorder made her a champion for people who shared her diagnosis. As well as opening up about bipolar disorder, Carrie Fisher was candid about using drugs and alcohol to cope with the emotional ups and downs that came with the disorder. She wrote about smoking weed from age 13, initially with her mother, in Wishful Drinking. She quit the drug 6 years later on the set of Star Wars, writing, quote, "It suddenly became creepy and dark and scary. Instead, on the set of The Empire Strikes Back, I did blow a couple of times," she told the Daily Beast in 2015, adding, quote, "It was location. Location means everything is permitted," end quote. Ultimately, her drug use turned into a full-blown addiction to various substances, including cocaine, hallucinogenics, and opiates. It wasn't until she overdosed in 1985 and went into rehab that she was able to confront both her addictions and her bipolar disorder. Getting off drugs with the help of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings initially made her feel pretty crazy, as she told WebMD, and she occasionally relapsed. Carrie Fisher died on December the 27th, 2016, 4 days after she had had a heart attack on a flight. And tragically, her mother, Debbie Reynolds, died the next day of a stroke. In June 2017, The Guardian reported that the just-released coroner's report stated that the official cause of Fisher's death was sleep apnea, in which air can't get into the lungs during sleep or unconsciousness. In addition, tests showed that Fisher's blood contained traces of cocaine, heroin, morphine, and MDMA, although it wasn't clear whether these had contributed to her death or not. Fisher had been open about the fact that she had occasionally relapsed into drug use after getting sober. Her daughter, Billie Lord, issued a statement to People magazine in response, writing, quote, "My mom battled drug addiction and mental illness her entire life. She ultimately died of it," end quote. Lord added that Fisher, quote, "was purposefully open in all of her work about the social stigmas surrounding these diseases, and that, quote, she'd wanted her death to encourage people to be open about their struggles," end quote. Number 1. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor's comedy was raw, real, and revolutionary, but the story behind the laughter was filled with pain. From setting himself on fire during a drug binge to enduring multiple heart attacks, Pryor's life was as tumultuous as his stand-up routines were. He pushed the boundaries on stage and in life, wrestling with his demons and addictions until the very end. His story is not just a tale of a comedian who made us laugh, but a man who struggled deeply with his own darkness. What drove Richard Pryor to the edge, and how did he finally find peace? One of the most celebrated comedians of all time, Richard Pryor boasts numerous awards, including 1 Emmy, 5 Grammys, and a Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, which he received in 1998. Along with his legendary stand-up films, including the 1971's Live and Smokin', he is also a noted movie star, with parts in the 1970s films like Lady Sings the Blues, The Mac, Some Call It Lovin', Blazing Saddles, Silver Streak, Grease Lightning, and The Wiz. Virtually all comedians today pay homage to Richard Pryor, whose unique storytelling and observational style of comedy wholly shaped the art of stand-up as it is known today. On June 9, 1980, Richard Pryor was at home with some friends when his entire body caught on fire. He jumped out of the window and ran down the street while his clothes melted and his skin blistered. He refused help until several policemen finally got him into an ambulance. Although shocked, those closest to Richard Pryor had seen something like this coming. His behavior had begun to intensify in its destructiveness. His consumption of drugs and alcohol knew no limits. He was racked with anger, emotional pain, and insecurity, demons from his youth that wouldn't leave him no matter how rich and famous he got. On stage, he was lionized. On screen, he was adored. But in life, he continued to lash out at those around him. He beat up wives and girlfriends and deliberately sabotaged professional engagements. Filming Paul Schrader's Blue Collar in 1977, he had fistfights with members of the cast and waved a loaded gun around in front of the director. In November that same year, just before his 37th birthday, he'd suffered a heart attack while screwing one of the most attractive white women ever, he said. The following month, on New Year's Eve, he took a gun and shot up his wife's car when she tried to leave him. In 1979, he took his drug consumption to a new level and started freebasing, mixing rock cocaine with ether and smoking it. He carried his cocaine pipe around with him everywhere, stoked it up as much as he could, sucked on it like a chick's dick. Early in 1980, he was out of control on the set of Stir Crazy, throwing the shooting schedule into complete disarray by turning up half a day late for scenes and then holding the producers for ransom for another $500,000 just to complete the film. On June the 9th, it all came to a head. Pryor, in his state of round-the-clock paranoia, thought he was being lied to, abused, and cheated out of his money. He went into his bank on Sunset and Vine and tried to withdraw everything from his various accounts. The bank manager informed him that he needed notice and couldn't authorize the withdrawal. Pryor went back home and continued to smoke the pipe until he ran out of cocaine. By then, he later wrote, I was experiencing serious dementia, stuck in a surreal landscape of constantly shifting emotions. At this point, he decided to commit suicide by covering himself with rum and firing up the Bic lighter he used with his pipe. It took 3 attempts to become a human torch. On the morning of December the 10th, 2005, Pryor had a 3rd heart attack at his house in Los Angeles. After his wife's failed attempts to resuscitate him, he was taken to a local West Side hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 7:58 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. His widow, Jennifer, was quoted as saying, quote, "At the end, there was a smile on his face," end quote. Wow, what a ride through Hollywood's darker side. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hey, if you're still craving for more untold stories and hidden truths from Hollywood's past, check out the videos popping up on your screen now. Catch you in the next one.